So yesterday we talked about what it means to be multicellular. Okay, what was the one thing something had to have, or a characteristic it had to have if it was going to be multicellular? Chase?
Specialization.
Specialization. Okay, and then we looked at the layers of the leaf as an example of specialization in a multicellular organism. So we need to know and be able to explain later, like let's say on a place like a unit exam, what each part of the layers of the leaf do. Okay, so what is the role of the epidermis? What's the role of the palisade layer? What's the role of the spongy layer? Okay, what's the role of the stomates and the guard cells and all that? You gotta be able to tell me how they work, why they're evidence of a specialized organism. Okay, and then we're gonna look today at how that applies to how a plant moves material. Okay, so make sure we know those parts of the leaf, because like I say, they're gonna be important. We'll actually go over them again a couple of times throughout the unit here. Okay. So, key points. We need to understand how transport within cells is similar and involved in transport in a multicellular organism. So, the big three, okay, diffusion, osmosis, active transport, okay, those are used by individual cells, yes, but they're also used on a larger scale for a multicellular organism. Okay, now I'm not saying that a multicellular organism uses diffusion to transport material from one place to another across something as big as a person. No, that wouldn't work. We know that already. Okay, but still on the scale of a large organism, it's still happening in individual cells. Okay, osmosis can actually work over very large distances because it produces a force, a movement of water towards salt concentrations. Okay. Does that sort of make sense? And that's what we're going to look at, is how plants transport material. Okay, so we're going to look at how nutrients, that is water, sugar, and minerals, are transported in vascular plants. This word here, vascular, okay, it means plants that have tubes. Right? Not all plants have the ability to transport water in the way that we're going to talk about today. Most plants that you would associate with being plants are vascular plants. Okay, those plants there are vascular plants. Trees are vascular plants. Grass is a vascular plant. Okay, the plants that aren't vascular would be things like mosses. Okay, a moss is not a vascular plant. Okay, that's why they dry out so quickly in the sun. Liverworts, hornworts, things like that are not vascular plants. Okay, that's why they grow right on the ground. Okay, things like that. Does that sort of make sense? So vascular plants have the ability to grow vertically significantly. All right, we're going to look at the structure of vascular plants, so the different parts, some of their survival tactics that they use, okay, and what forces are involved in the transport of water and sugar in plants in particular. All right, now, when we're talking about plants, or at least terrestrial plants, okay, here's what we have to understand. They're the resources that they need, that would be water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight, are not found in the same place. Okay? Water is found in the ground, and in the ground there's no light. Okay? Carbon dioxide is found in the air, which is above the ground. Right? So a plant has to be able to transport materials from one place to another, because parts of the plant can do one job but can't do the other. Okay? That's back to that whole specialization thing we talked about yesterday. Okay, so what process can the roots not carry out that the leaves can? The leaves can do this, but the roots can't. Photosynthesis. Roots can't carry out photosynthesis because it's dark underground where the roots are. Okay, simple reason. Right? The cells that in roots often have small numbers of chloroplasts, but they're totally inactive. They don't do anything because they can't do anything. Right? There's no light down there to start the process of photosynthesis. So they have to cooperate. Okay? The leaves, on the other hand, they can carry out photosynthesis, but as we learned yesterday, they're covered in a waxy cuticle, which means they can't absorb water. Okay? Plants do not absorb water through their leaves. In fact, their leaves are designed to shed water. right? If we're looking at the leaves of a plant, okay, if they get wet, if water sits on the leaf, it eventually weighs the leaf down until the leaf turns and points and the water runs off and lands on the ground right where the roots are. Okay? Plants are designed perfectly to shed the water that lands on them and have it land where the roots are so the roots can absorb it. Okay? The roots are perfectly designed to absorb water, but they can't carry out photosynthesis. The leaves are perfectly designed to carry out photosynthesis, but can't absorb water. So there's got to be basically a highway that will transport those two things in different directions. All right? Now, can you put those two things in the same set of tubes? No. That's like putting an eastbound train and a westbound train on the same track. It's not going to end well. Okay? So they need to have a separate set of tubes for moving water up and sugar down. All right, so plants have come up with a lot of strategies in terms of how they deal with this separation of their resources. Okay? Some plants will actually kind of clone themselves isn't really a good way to describe it, but they'll grow new parts of themselves or new copies of themselves in different places and then connect the two copies by what's called a stolon, which is basically a pipeline. Okay, it's a plant pipeline. So raspberries do this, strawberries do this. Okay, so the plant will originally grow in one place. When it starts to exhaust the nutrients and water and stuff like that in the soil that's surrounding the original plant, it'll grow a stolon, which is just like a tendril, and it'll plop itself down in another spot where there's nothing growing, and there would be water and nutrients in that soil. A new plant will grow there, and then nutrients can be transferred in between them, okay, back and forth. Right? So it's a strategy that helps them overcome, let's say, having all the nutrients in one area be used up. Okay? Other plants will store excess energy in parts of the root. Okay? So if you've ever had potatoes, okay, potatoes are an example of an energy storage structure that a plant uses. Because a plant can carry out a lot of photosynthesis. Okay? And it doesn't need all of the energy it produces for growth. Right? So it uses some of it for storage, okay? Which is why there's so many calories in potatoes. Okay? They are an energy storage molecule, okay? Or they're full of what's called starch. Okay? Starch is for plants what fat is to animals. Okay? So if we have excess energy, we store it as fat. If plants have excess energy, they store it as starch. Right? And so the starchier parts of the plant, okay, will be the parts where they're storing their energy. Now, can you grow another potato plant from a potato?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called vegetative propagation. You may have learned that in Science 9. Okay, so you can just cut the potato, or you've seen The Martian, where Mark Watney does the same thing. Okay, you just cut the potato, you put it in the dirt, hopefully not with other people's poop included, because that's what he had to do. Okay, and it will grow. Okay, it's gonna just vegetatively propagate. That plant will be genetically identical to the one that made the potato. Okay? Potatoes do this as a way to survive winter. Okay? The green part, the fleshy foliage part of the plant is going to die through the winter. Right? But in the springtime, there's enough energy in the potato for a new plant to grow from. Okay? If you've ever left potatoes by accident in the pantry, okay, they grow a sprout eventually, kind of like a purple looking thing that kind of comes up and starts looking for light. Okay, I once left some in the basement of my house, totally forgot about them. Okay, like a year later I went down there and it looked like there was a giant spider growing in like the shelf. And it was like, had these long purple legs, and on the purple legs were little purple leaves. But it was too dark in the basement, it never got any light, so it never was able to carry out photosynthesis. But it had shrunk the potato down to nothing. Okay? It had used all of the energy that had been stored in that potato to try desperately to get to the light and grow again. Right? So that's why potatoes get those little sprouts on them. They're just trying to grow again. The conditions are, good enough, or temperature-wise, for them to grow, so they try. Okay. All right. Things like onions, okay, will also store energy in the base of their leaves. Okay, so onions have kind of weird shaped leaves, right? They've got the tubes that come out. Okay, and the fleshy part of the onion is sweet because it's got sugars stored in it. So rather than storing it as starch, it stores it as sugar, okay, in that part. Okay, making some sense? So there's lots of little survival strategies. Question? No? Okay, lots of little survival strategies that plants will use in order to deal with stressful situations. Okay, so what we have to know here basically is that a vascular plant is differentiated into kind of different systems. There's going to be a subterranean, that's underground, root system, and its job is to absorb water and minerals. And then there's the shoot system that would include the stems and leaves that make food. Now, the primary job of the stem is not to make food. Right? It can, it's got enough chloroplasts that it can carry out photosynthesis, but it's not its primary job. And in some plants, in fact, it doesn't carry out any at all, like trees. Okay? Because it's encased in bark and it can't carry out any photosynthesis because the chloroplasts are basically hidden. All right, one of the really important adaptations of plants is how they can compete with each other for resources. Okay, and one of the main ways that they compete for light is to try and shade each other out. Okay, the best way to do that is to get taller than your competition. Okay, so we see that in forests. Okay, the growth is very vertical. Plants try to get as tall as possible so that they can reach the sunlight. Okay? Now, the only way a plant can get tall is if it has a really strong stem or converts its stem into a trunk. Okay? So the plants that are here, okay, they don't have a trunk. They've got stems, but they're fleshy. Okay? So they can't support their own weight. Right? If I let it go, it just falls down. It's not going to grow upwards very well. Okay? This is the upper limit to the height that that plant can reach. Okay? Because its stems are all fleshy and fairly weak when it comes right down to it. Right? But if you want to get tall and compete for light, one of the best things you can have is this material here, lignin. Now, lignin is like cement, okay? It's analogous to cement anyway, okay? And what it does is it takes the cell walls of various plant cells and cements them together, okay? So I think I used this example, I talked about it before, where if you're laying bricks, you don't just set bricks on top of each other and then do nothing and say, oh, that wall will be good, okay? What you do is you lay the bricks and then you put mortar, which is the gray cement that goes in between the bricks. You obviously can't see it on here because the bricks are painted, okay? But that stuff that goes in between all the bricks is mortar. Okay? It's basically just cement, right? It goes in the holes in the bricks, right? So in a cinder block, there's a hole here and a hole here. Those holes match up with the holes on the other blocks. You pour cement down the holes, and this becomes one big giant brick, as opposed to a whole bunch of individual bricks. Well, lignin works the same way for the cells of a plant in its stem. It cements the cells, the cell walls, together and makes them really hard, right? So now, these cells don't have to rely on the cell wall or the water vacuole for strength. They're cemented together, right? Does that sort of make sense? Okay? So that's what lignin does. It cements this stuff together and it makes wood. Okay? This is where lumber, okay, or the woody part of a plant comes from. Lignin is essentially what makes wood. Okay? So that can allow the plant to be very strong, but still, unlike concrete, somewhat flexible. Okay? Wood is somewhat flexible. If you've ever taken a long piece of wood, you can bend it still. Okay? A tree can obviously sway in the wind. It's designed that way. If it was just perfectly rigid, it would break. Some bigger trees do, because if you get too big, you do get pretty rigid, okay? And they can break off, right? But it's very, very strong, and it allows the shoots, okay, that would be the leaves and things like that, to get to a higher height where they can get more sunlight. Okay, so lignin, make sure you know what that is. Cement makes wood, makes the plant be able to get taller. Okay, and it's actually used in other parts of the plant as well as a protective function. So it's what makes the hard shell of a nut. Okay, so if you've seen like a walnut or a chestnut, okay, or acorn, okay, something like that, okay, it's the same thing, that hard covering that protects the seeds. Okay, in a pine cone, same idea. Okay, pine cones are made of wood. Right? And some pine cones for certain trees are actually sealed in a resin. Okay? So when they fall off, the seeds don't come out until the resin is gone. What gets rid of the resin? It could be, but not too many animals will eat that type. Some will eat certain types of pine cones for sure. Okay? And then in the same way that fruit works, an animal eating the pine cone or eating the fruit means that the seeds will later be deposited back on the ground in a nutrient-rich medium. Right? Okay. Most of the time the resin is going to be water repellent. Resin is kind of like oil.
Isn't it fire?
It's fire. Okay? Lots of pine cones are coated in this resin that doesn't come off until it melts. Okay? And the only thing that will melt it is the high temperature of a forest fire. Because if a tree is mature and strong, you don't want to have a little tiny tree trying to grow beside it and compete with it for resources. It'll have no chance. You're better off to wait until that tree is dead. And one of the things that kills trees is fire. Okay? So when the fire comes through, it kills the tree that made the pine cone, and then releases the seeds from the pine cone, and there's all this ash, which is rich in nutrients. There's no competition, but there's a bit of shade, because you're little, and you don't want to be in direct sunlight, okay, when you're too little, and then you'll grow up and you'll be fine. Okay? So it's another strategy that plants use to be able to reproduce successfully. Okay? Having your seeds try to grow in the shadow of their parent is terrible, okay, for plants anyway. Okay. All right, so turgor pressure. This is the thing we talked about the other day, that stuff that's in the water vacuole that helps support the plant. So we've got the cellulose fibers in the cell wall support the plant, lignin can support the plant, and then turgor pressure can support the plant. So I no longer have these plants because during COVID we were told we had to get rid of our plants. I still don't understand why. But whatever. I'm a rule follower. So this is the before picture, okay, of the plant, and then and same with this one. So this was like I came back from summer. I didn't come in and water my plants over the summer, and they got all like this, okay. And then when I watered them, okay, they kind of came back, right. And what happened is they were in this condition here, where their water vacuoles had been basically depleted. Okay? Because as water evaporates, salt gets left behind in the spaces between the cells. Water gets drawn out of the cells by osmosis, okay, to balance that, and the cells' water vacuoles shrink, and then the plant wilts. Okay? Now it'll eventually come back if you get those vacuoles to fill up. Okay? A plant will come back as long as it's not crunchy. All right? Once the plant is crunchy, it's too far gone. Okay? But it will come back if you give it a little bit of water. And I never did find that video. Okay, so to kind of get the idea of what turgor pressure does? Yeah. Okay, so you got the water vacuoles, they're full, okay, they've got lots of pressure in them, they push against the cell wall, okay, and the plant can support itself. Okay? Alright. Alright, so job of the roots, okay, and basically the different types of roots, okay, because there are actually different types of root systems. Okay, so the job of the roots is to provide an anchor, okay, to absorb minerals and water, and to an extent conduct water and nutrients, and sometimes, in the case of a potato, store food. Okay. Now, potato, fruit or vegetable?
Vegetable.
Vegetable. Cucumber,
Vegetable.
fruit. Peas,
Vegetable.
fruit. Tomato,
Fruit.
fruit. Pumpkin,
Fruit.
fruit. How do you tell the difference?
Seeds.
Right. If it comes from a flower, it's fruit. Because it'll have seeds. Okay, that's how you tell the difference. Right? Peas come from a flower. Corn, flower. Okay, they're all fruit. They may not look like it, but they're all fruit. Okay, zucchini, cucumber, pumpkin, squash, they're all fruit. Okay, people get it wrong all the time. Okay, if it comes from a flower, it's a fruit. Okay, if it's a leaf or a root, it's a vegetable. Okay, so looking at roots, different root types. Okay, we got tap roots. Tap roots are a single long root that can go sometimes fairly deep. Okay, sometimes like 50 meters even, if we're talking about like a mesquite bush or something like that in the desert. Okay, carrots, turnips, beets, okay, all of those things are tap roots. They generally serve some sort of energy storage function as well. Okay, fibrous roots are like what grass would have. Okay, it doesn't have a single long root, it's just got roots that go everywhere. Okay, most grasses, so that would be all of our like crops, so grain and things like that have fibrous root systems. Okay, prop roots are ones that can actually be above the ground as well as below. Some trees in the tropical rainforest will have prop roots, okay, that are actually above the ground, and they help prop up the plant during flooding, keeps it from tipping over or being washed away. Okay. Also allows them to absorb oxygen when their roots are submerged. Okay. All right, and adventitious roots are roots that can kind of come out anywhere on the plant, and most plants can do this, especially these ones here. They make adventitious roots because every place where there's a kind of a change in the shape, okay, of the plant, there's these little brown protrusions that are actually quite sharp. But they can become roots if they touch something that could be rich in nutrients, even drywall. Okay, if I'm not careful with this stuff, if I don't keep it away from the wall, it will put those things into the wall, literally through the drywall. Okay, I found this out the hard way one time because I was moving and I had the plant that had been growing for a few years on top of my cupboards. And I grabbed the plant and I stepped down off the cupboard and I pulled a chunk of drywall about that big out because it had put roots through and behind the drywall. Okay. So yeah, be careful if you have a plant like this one. It's called Pothos syndapsis. It'll eat your wall. Careful with it. Okay. All right, the two main types we're going to be concerned with are just going to be tap and fibrous. Okay, those are the two most common types. Which one would be better at preventing soil erosion? A taproot or a fibrous root? Which one will hold on to soil better? Fibrous root. Fibrous root. That's why we plant grass, okay, in places, because it keeps the wind from picking up the dirt and blowing it away. All right? It's why farmers, when they harvest their crops, don't plow them up very often. Okay? They leave the roots there. They leave the bottom of the plant with its roots there because it'll hold the soil in place and prevent soil erosion by wind and water. Okay? All right, tap roots. Okay, tap roots are strong. They can go pretty deep. Okay, which one do you suppose a plant in the desert is likely to have? Like, which one would be most advantageous? Yeah, like the logical part would say taproot, and some desert plants have them. If they can get down to the water table, okay, so like tap an aquifer or a well, okay, a taproot is better. But the saguaro cactus has a fibrous root system. It just can spread out. Sometimes they'll find them 50 to 100 meters away from the plant itself. Because in the desert, the soil's dry really deep. Okay? What you want to be able to do is, when it does rain, get that stuff before it dries up. Because it doesn't ever really get a chance to absorb into the soil. So you want to have roots that are right near the surface, so when it does rain, you can grab that water right away. Okay? So there's kind of two strategies to go about survival in the desert. Both of these can be equally effective. All right, which one's better in a windstorm?
Tap.
Okay, sure.
Out of the two?
Out of the two, yeah.
Oh, tap.
Taproot, okay? It can be, but here's what you need to consider. If it's windy and here's ground level, when the top of the tree starts to do this, what's the bottom of the tree gonna do?
Stay.
It's gonna pivot. It creates a pivot point, because we always think that, right? We think logically. The deeper it goes, the stronger and the better it would be, because that seems logical. Well, that's what we do with houses. We put pilings deep into the ground, but we put many pilings deep into the ground, not one. Okay? Because if it starts to do this, this is how you pull a post out of the ground. Okay? A post goes deep into the ground. You want to pull it out and shake it back and forth like this, and you work the bottom back and forth by working the top back and forth. The same thing can happen to a tree. If it starts, the top starts going like this, look what happens to the bottom. The bottom starts to wiggle too, okay? And eventually, it'll loosen itself right up, okay? And it can come right out of the ground. Fibrous roots can grab a whole bunch of places around the tree, okay? And actually make it more secure. It's actually more likely to break off than it is to come out of the ground if it's got a fibrous root. All right. Stems. Okay, so job of the stem is to support the plant and transport water and nutrients. Okay, they can carry out photosynthesis, but it's not their primary job. Okay, the main job of the stem is conduction and support. Okay, so with the stem, okay, we've got obviously branches that can come off of it, okay? And stems are actually adapted so that if part of them is broken off, there can be new growth from below. Okay, so in this case here, okay, this is the same plant kind of before and after, right? So this plant was cut off right here, right? Down below, there's little buds here and here. Okay? And so when that part of the plant got cut off, it just signaled to these buds to grow new foliage, okay? To put new branches out and get more leaves in those areas. Okay? This is why, I don't know if you've ever been at a hedge maze or seen a hedge maze. Okay? Or like they've got a hedge around the cemetery, okay, over here on the other side of town. That hedge didn't always look that way. Okay? When you first plant a hedge, it's a couple of little sticks. Okay? You put a few little sticks here and there. Okay? And each year you let that stick grow a little bit and then chop the top off. Okay? And that forces it to grow from down below and get thicker. And every time it gets a little bit too tall, you chop the top off again. Okay? And it'll grow thicker from below, and it'll keep getting thicker and thicker and thicker until you've got like a big hedge that's very, very thick, that's effectively a fence. Right? All plants generally will do that. So if you trim a plant, you're going to make it grow from below and make it get thicker. And it's also why the more you cut your lawn, the thicker it gets, because it forces it to grow from the roots from down below as opposed to just getting tall and stringy. Okay? If you've ever seen like people that have topiaries, okay, those plants that are like trimmed into a shape, same idea. Okay? The more you trim it, the thicker it gets from the inside. Okay. the leaves. Okay, oh, here's another diagram of the leaf. It's probably better than the one we looked at the other day. Okay, so job of the leaves. Leaves are the photosynthetic organs of the plants. Okay, they don't always look the same. Okay, and sometimes they don't even carry out photosynthesis, oddly enough. Where are the leaves on a cactus? They're the thorns. Okay? On a cactus, the leaves have evolved to no longer carry out photosynthesis, but to protect the part of the plant that does. And so in a cactus, most of the photosynthesis is actually carried out by the central barrel part of the cactus, and the leaves have modified themselves to be thorns, which prevents the cactus from being eaten. Okay, because, well, not too many animals are capable of chomping down on the thorns of a cactus and not having something unpleasant happen. Okay? There are exceptions. One of them is in Alberta. Okay? How many people have ever seen an antelope? Okay? Mostly in the deep south of Alberta, but antelope will eat prickly pear cactus. Their tongue and the inside of their mouth is like shoe leather. Okay? It's super tough. Okay? And they can actually bite down and the thorns will just come off. Okay? If you've ever seen what happens to your dog if they get into a cactus, it's nasty. You can't try to pull those thorns out, but for an antelope, they can just bite on it. No problem. Okay. All right, so leaves generally, cacti being an exception, okay, carry out photosynthesis. Okay? And they generally have this structure. Okay? So we've got that upper epidermis that secretes the cuticle. Okay? You've got the palisade layer that carries out photosynthesis. You can see how tightly packed those cells are. You've got your veins and veinlets running through the leaf. You got the spongy layer that can carry out photosynthesis but is mostly responsible for letting water, oxygen, and carbon dioxide get exchanged. You got the lower epidermis, okay, that secretes the cuticle on the bottom of the leaf. And you got stomates and guard cells also on the bottom of the leaf. Now we didn't talk about this yesterday, but why aren't there any stomates on the top of the leaf? Well, there's not going to be as much water because the spongy layer is on the bottom, but what other evolutionary advantage does having the part of you that allows water to evaporate be on the bottom of the leaf? What is there always under a tree? Okay, I probably should have said that a different way. You're absolutely right, roots. It's a hot sunny day. Shade. Yeah, shade. Okay, if you put the stomates on the bottom of the leaf, they're always in the shade, which will limit the amount of evaporation that's going to happen because they're not in direct sunlight all the time. Okay, plants have just evolved to do things like that because it serves their purpose, right? It's an advantage. Okay, so that's the layers of the leaf. We got to know that. This leaf type, it's not even a leaf type. You're not going to have to know. This is how a cactus looks. Remember, they don't have leaves. Okay, they're what we call a C4 plant, so they don't use a leaf. But they still have those same layers. Okay, their stomates are actually made out of 4 guard cells. Okay, so they are extreme in that they keep them pretty tightly closed, and they surround the veins with the same layers. Here's the palisade layer, here's the spongy layer, and here's the vein, and there's space around it. Okay, so they work quite a bit differently, and that helps them to conserve water and limit evaporation. Okay, and obviously you see that there's stomates on both sides because this isn't oriented like this, it's flipped on its side. Okay, so yeah, definitely know the leaves, okay, know the layers of them, and then for a normal leaf, okay, so this is going to challenge my artistic ability. That's a leaf, okay. The flat part here is called the blade. Okay, this is the stalk. And where the leaf attaches to a branch is called the petiole. I'm never going to ask you to label that. Okay, that's just so you know the parts if I ever use those terms. Okay, the blade of the leaf is the broad part that does the photosynthesis. Okay, questions there?
Okay.
Okay, now, transport. So this is kind of what we've been building towards here. How does a plant transport water and sugar? Well, it's got separate tubes for each one. All right? Now, just so you can see here, okay, the tubes are microscopic. Okay, so all of these little tubes here are parts of the xylem. Okay, that's the water conducting parts of the plant. Okay. To give you an idea of size, this little bar here is 20 micrometers. So most of these are 10 or less micrometers in diameter. Okay. They have to be, because a plant relies on two things to help it transport water. We talked about one of them already, the fact that water is what kind of molecule? Polar. Okay, so because water is polar, it can create hydrogen bonds with itself, cohesion, okay, and hydrogen bonds with the inside of the xylem tubes. That would be adhesion. Right? As long as the water column is very, very small, those hydrogen bonds are strong enough to hold the water up. Okay? If those tubes were bigger, like let's say even like a straw, for example, then there wouldn't be enough strength in those hydrogen bonds and they would break and the water would fall back down. Okay? And I think we talked about this back on that day, but if you try to if you use a really, really small straw, it's really easy to bring water up the straw. Okay? But you get a straw that's bigger and bigger and bigger, and sometimes you can't even create enough suction because there's all this liquid in the middle that is unsupported. Okay? And so if you had a big tube, like let's say this tube here, which is really big, okay, all the water that's basically in here has nothing to grab onto except other water. Okay? Only the water that's next to the tube can adhere to the tube. Okay? So the water gets too heavy and it can't be supported. So if the tubes are really, really small, then the polar nature of water is strong enough to support a column of water in that tube. Okay? So that keeps the water from falling back down. But it's not going to create a force that's going to draw it up. The force that's going to draw it up is osmosis. So as water evaporates out of the leaves, so out of the stomates, the salts and minerals and things like that that were in it get left behind. And they build up in the spongy layer of the leaf. Okay? If there's salt there, water wants to move towards it to balance the concentration. So water that's in the stem moves towards that salt by osmotic pressure. And it's literally pulled up the plant by this concentration of salt. The plant expends no energy to transport water from its roots to its leaves. Osmosis provides all the force. Okay? So that's going to bring the water up the plant to that point. And then as it evaporates, the salt again gets left behind, okay? Pulling more up. So all those water molecules are hydrogen bonded to each other like the barrel of monkeys, okay? And they're hydrogen bonded to the inside of the tube, and then some water evaporates, pulls some of them up. Okay, since they're all connected, they all come up together. Okay, is that making sense? Okay, so that's how the water comes up. Once photosynthesis takes place, okay, the water's evaporated, carbon dioxide has come in, oxygen goes out, and we've got sugar. Okay, the sugar needs to go down to the roots because the roots can't make it for themselves. Right? What force do you suppose the plant uses to make that happen? It's free and always working against you. Gravity, always bringing you down. Okay, stupid gravity. Okay, but in this case, it works really well because it's free and it's going in the direction that the sugar needs to go anyway. Okay, so the sugar just falls down the tubes, okay, towards the roots. Okay, so here's what you need to know for plant transport. The xylem transports water up the plant using osmosis and the polar nature of water. Okay, so the xylem transports water up by osmosis and the polar nature of water. The phloem transports sugar down the plant using gravity. Okay, now you have a diagram like that one on the right in your notes, yes? Pretty sure it's on the next piece. Yeah, okay. Okay, that's gonna be an important diagram for you to know, okay? Know the steps, the roots absorb the water and minerals, it goes up in the xylem, okay? Evaporates, that's, okay, gonna be osmosis creating that force, okay? Photosynthesis takes place, sugar is created, sugar goes down, okay? And the roots can then carry out cellular respiration. Okay, so these things here, which are also in your notes, go with that diagram, okay, step by step. Okay, if we're looking at the stem of a plant, it's set up this way. The xylem, which actually transports all the water, is on the inside of the stem. It's actually dead. Okay, the xylem is actually old phloem tubes. Okay, each season, a plant grows a new phloem on the outside. And that old phloem becomes xylem, which is why when you cut down a tree, you see rings. Yeah, those rings represent the location of the phloem each growing season. Okay, looking at the rings of a tree actually can tell us a lot about the growth of that tree. It can tell us, even if it's a really old tree, about climate, okay, and what the climate was like year after year. If you've got, one ring that's really particularly wide, the growing conditions that year were excellent. And then if you've got a couple that are really thin, it could have meant that it was colder or snowier, drier, whatever. Conditions that would have been different. Okay, it can actually tell us quite a bit. So the phloem is always on the outside of the stem. That's why the trunk of a tree can be really sappy. Okay? Any injury to the tree, okay, is going to result in sap leaking out, the sugary phloem sap. Okay, leaking out. So if you're, let's say, trying to make maple syrup and you got a maple tree around, how far into the tree do you need to go? Not very far. Those maple taps, they only go in about this far. Okay, because we're trying to get the sugary sap. I don't want to go into the middle of the tree. What's going to come out? What goes up the middle of the tree? Water. I don't want to get that. I want the sugary stuff. I'm not putting water on my pancakes. Okay, and stick them under the sink and do that. Okay, that's silly. Okay, I want the sugary stuff that's on the outside. Okay, this is why in the wintertime, deer will chew on poplar trees. And they'll come around, they'll just chew the bark off, right? Because they can get sugar from that. There's sugar frozen, or kind of not so much frozen, but stuck, okay, in the phloem tubes that they can eat. Because there's obviously no leaves to eat, okay, unless they come into my yard and dig up my yard and poop all over it. Stupid deer. Okay, sorry, I got off track. So the phloem's always on the outside, okay, and the phloem is carrying that sugary sap down to the roots. Okay, if that gets damaged, then the roots can starve. Okay, it's actually one way you can, if you ever needed to kill off a tree, you can kill it off by ringing it. Okay, which just means you cut all the way around the tree. You don't have to cut it down. You only have to cut into it about that far. Okay, just sever the phloem so that the sap can't get all the way to the roots, okay? And the tree will fall down and die because the roots will starve. Okay? I have never, ever done that on purpose, ever. Okay? Yeah, if somebody ignorantly plants a tree in a stupid place and you want to get rid of it, that's how you can get rid of it. Okay, because people are like, well, just go cut it down. Well, you get in trouble for that. But if the tree just mysteriously gets sick and dies, okay, then nobody knows the difference. Okay, and you can this doesn't have to be a big noticeable section either. Okay, you can just use like a little piece of wire, just go around the tree. Okay, and it'll be enough. Okay, it'll be enough to take it out. Okay. Talked about that. Okay, so we said already the xylem transports water up the plant. Okay, it's in the center of the stem or trunk. It's accomplished by osmosis. Okay, adhesion, cohesion, polar nature of water. If I asked you this on a test, did you include all of that in your answer?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And then for the phloem, okay, so the phloem transports the sugars down the plant, and they actually interact quite a bit because phloem sap can get really thick, really viscous, and sometimes water needs to go into it to thin it out and allow it to run more easily. In the wintertime, obviously no water is running up the plant, so the phloem sap gets almost solid, okay, and then that actually prevents the plant from freezing. It actually acts like an antifreeze, because it can't, because it's so high in sugar, it actually can't crystallize. All right, slow gravity, yeah, okay. Sweet, we got through it. And it's 11:24. Done. All done.